All right, thank you so much. And I think what I'm going to do is just walk you through a process of how we've been working with different actors. And it's not really a technology tool, it's more of a process that ends up in a product that can change differently depending on the context. So, all right, so the major problem we're trying to address is, this was discussed earlier on when we started, that we cannot ignore work that is ongoing in the online spaces, just because we've seen the interaction between the offline and the online, where narratives end up showing up offline and vice versa. However, with this realization, we have another problem, that we can think of the solutions as going into these spaces, collecting the data, but we are peace builders. We don't have tech systems integrated within our organization. We don't have tech departments, and even the skills themselves are lacking. And I think some of the examples here, what you find is peace builders actually going out to work with tech companies to develop a product and then bring it back into their own organization and then try to run it. Now, what the challenge with that is, you're constantly looking at the tech community to sort of think like a peace builder, and you're always trying to interface with them, and new challenges are showing up every day. And what we've seen in conflict is it changes very fast. So, and tech, as well, as much as it changes very fast, just tweaking some of these tools and systems is not as easy, because then you tweak one thing and you change the whole system, introduce a new dynamic. So an example of what we've seen in this type of space, so just to give you an example, is you have Peace Builders. This is a program we were doing in Sudan, and we were trying to understand posts on social media that were basically advocating for violence and those that were advocating for solidarity. And the first thing is we were able to go out, collect this data, and we ran up to 385,000 posts. So that's a lot of data for a peace builder to start thinking about, what do I do with this? How do I scheme all the data? How do I manage to understand what is actually happening? And then we ran a simple classification system, and we actually realized only 3.4% of the data was relevant. So it's a question of, we have a lot of data, but how much of that data is relevant for our work to be able to make informed decisions? And we've seen this narrative quite a lot, where people say it's only a subset of social media that is actually being amplified with algorithms or by the design that then reaches the public, and people say social media has a lot of hate, right? So this is something that I'm still come up against. So this is basically a simple classification that we were running. And the idea was just to say, well, if you have these phrases or these words, then classify as this. And that means that the peace builder can now start looking at the relevant data, as opposed to trying to swing through the 385,000 posts and end up looking at cartoons and cat videos. So when I say we, who do I mean? So this is a group. This is now the automatic classifiers for this. This is a group of researchers, engineers, and peace builders who have come together to say, well, we have some skills, we have some time, and we have some knowledge to be able to implement this type of content and actually see and test it, whether it's going to work. And there's also the advanced tools that are actually now readily available, ChatGPT, GPT-4, when it came out, people are now thinking, how do we use it for all this type of work? So it's readily available. The cost is not as big as 5 years back. And then another reason for coming together is also to collaborate, to build classifiers, and basically work with global North and South. And this is quite important, because if you work in the global South, you start to realize that there are some tools that get rolled out in the global North, but they don't make it to the global South until 1 year later, right? So in that point in time, that tool which was useful at that point in time, maybe in a conflict, would have really helped solve a lot of challenges 1 year ago. But now we're in a conflict, and these tools, would have been useful, but just because of zoning and technology laws and all these things, sometimes those tools don't move into these communities. And then we're trying also to focus on under-resourced languages. In some of the contexts that I work in, think of coding in Hausa or in Swahili. It's mind-boggling. Or looking at content that is polarizing and it's harmful and it's targeting a minority, but it's in a completely different language that ChatGPT has not yet been able to to understand. And then trying to also keep it open source, so that the data that we build, the work that comes out of this group is actually shareable and people can actually use it. Because there's a whole department of academics who are saying, we wish we had more data, right? Not just data from the global North, but data from other countries, just to understand, do we experience polarization the same, for instance, in the US or in South Africa? So how does it work? A peace builder comes to us and says, I'm struggling with this problem and I'm seeing a lot of content online. How do we address this? So we scrape the data for them, and then we give them a sample of the data set for them to annotate. And once they annotate, we run experiments. We check, and using this basically open LLMs, we are trying to check if the LLMs can then predict the same annotation as the humans. And then we actually make publicly available the experiment that has the best results. And then we deploy it now to the larger data set. So for instance, like in 385 posts, so taking a sample of that, annotating it, and then using that to deploy it up to the larger data set. So this is basically a sample annotation, just to try to make it simple so that even a peace builder can actually just go through it. Because there are other ways to annotate data that are a bit more complex. So this is just read and consider the comment above, how offensive do you think it is, and you have a scale. And this can focus on many things. It can focus on cat issues, it can focus on, I don't know, what do you think your government is pro or anti one thing. And once we have that data, this is basically what the output looks like. You have the post ID, the text, and then is polarizing results that are done by human. And then now we take this information, run it through different experiments and different platforms, different LLMs, and what we're trying to do is to see if the prediction can actually match. And here, what you're playing with is percentages of accuracy, really. And you don't, I mean, and this is one thing that we've come across where peace builders say, can it not be 100% accurate? And then you start to realize there's a gap between understanding how technology works and how reality works, right? Because in reality, you'll ask somebody, do you believe this? And they'll tell you accurately, yes, I do. It's 100% feedback, right? Yeah.
Just press the button so it's green.
I'm pressing the button.
Green.
Yep.
Thanks. So if you're using human responses to test against the LLMs, I guess my question is, what is your baseline data when you're actually training those LLMs? Because if you're using this to, I guess, if you're using this to try to test the LLM itself, what is the, I guess, how are you training it so that you're not adding bias as you go?
Yes. So, and, oh yeah.
Some people lie.
All right. Definitely. Okay. No problem. I'll just get one example also in Nigeria where we've done this, and thinking of the different languages that exist in a particular country like Nigeria, where you don't, I mean, with the existing LLMs, most of them are just in the general languages like English, French, and all that. So what we do is we cross different partners. So for instance, you have one organization and then you're working with multiple annotators and then who are looking at the same data set, right? And then they're cross-checking with each other just to see, first of all, do we agree on that this is actually polarizing? Yes, and then we're providing that now to test with the LLMs. And part of, and I'll get to some of the challenges with this type of content, because for instance, if you ask an annotator whether this content includes, well, this content talks about violence against women, that is very straightforward, as opposed to, is this polarizing, right? So just, and I'll get to that point in time in terms of what type of data is more challenging to work with when you're trying to annotate versus which one is more direct. Like, is this a cat video versus this is not a cat video, right? And just because conflict is a bit more sticky or murky or gray, as opposed to, I don't know, when you're marketing a product and you're saying, is this red or blue? Yeah. All right, and then other experiments that we're also trying to look at are, active learning open source tools, and just, I won't get into this, but these are also things that we're also working on. So I'll just jump quite quickly into the dashboard that we did for Nigeria. And what happened was, in Nigeria, we worked with an organization called CTAD, and they came to us and said, well, we're struggling with this type of information online, and we want to understand, is there hate speech? This is actually a very sticky point, like hate speech, which has been quite a debate, but not only hate speech, but is there dangerous speech? And this was, they wanted to look at the data from the election year, which was last year, because there were cases that people were claiming that there were incidences of violence that had started online. And they wanted just to go back in time and see what that looked like in that space, and try to see whether there was actual evidence on that, and also try and connect the dots to see, but without the knowledge of that data, without just understanding how they're able to annotate, it will just then be them swimming in a data set that is, again, like we've seen. All right. All right, so this is a sample, a dashboard, and again, it's open source. As anyone who's done tech work, we are using Superset on this one, so the dashboards are quite clunky. They're not as pretty as the commercial ones, but it just, it gets the work done. You can actually tweak it to look a bit better. So number of posts collected, 425,000 posts. Who can guess how much of this is relevant? 20,000 is relevant? Well, let's check. So if I select all of them and then remove the irrelevant data, and these are the what we were annotating based on hate speech, dangerous speech, we are left with 46,000 posts, right? So now this becomes an interesting point of discussion just between the organizations that are working in this space to try and understand, oh, wow, so we've collected all this data, but this is the one that is relevant based on our annotation. We're not saying it's the source of truth. All right, and then you just have a timeline to show them and anyone who's looking at the data in areas of interest where you might want to look at, just because now the data has actually been sorted to look at the irrelevant and the relevant data. And I won't get into a lot of the work. So also one of the things we were looking at was security information content in that particular context. But one thing you'll notice with this data set is it has three categories under dangerous speech and hate speech. So there's one where it was clear that everybody agreed that this was hate speech or dangerous speech. But then there were others that had low certainty or medium certainty. This shows you how people sometimes digest this type of information when you're working with humans and you ask them to annotate the data. And we just kept it there because we said, like I said earlier, this data is now public and we can share it with academics who now want to understand where are the areas of contention, where are the areas of division, where people say this is dangerous and somebody says, well, I don't think it's really dangerous. And we just realized it depends a lot with where they're coming from and how they're experiencing the situation. And even if the other day I was talking to Susan Benesh and she was saying, yeah, there's a framework, but even that framework, sometimes people look at it subjectively, right? So it really depends on who you're working with. So this is by topic. So we're looking at posts by topics, which topics are generated the most posts, which topics generated the most interactions. So this is quite interesting because some of the peace builders were saying, well, yeah, there's a lot of posts, but this one is generating more interactions. And this is the point we really want. This is where people are coalescing as opposed to a lot of people are just putting out hate speech. Comments that topics that generated the most comments, and then they also wanted to look at emojis.
Just quickly, what's the security? What is that?
So security is any content online that was talking about security. So
Oh,
that one, and this is what I was saying earlier when it comes to when you're annotating data with peace builders, it's very easy to say this post is actually talking about security versus this post is hate speech. So one is very clear and the other one is quite debatable, just because of some of the stickiness of the issues. And then also actors by comments, which actors are generating the most comments, and then trying to see if we filter by hate speech, are these other actors we should be engaging in. And it continues with the top post by interactions. And here you're actually able to see the specific posts and read all of that. But then at the very top, you're also able to look at the specific actors now in detail, that actors that get the most interactions. And you're still able to filter by the date, the time, on the left-hand side, the page type. And page type is basically, is this a media page? Is this an academic page and all that, so that you're able to also actually see which actors are generating which type of content based on the data you've collected. Top 10 pages by post, top 10 pages by interactions, and which topics, if you want to match that by pages. And it all goes on. And then also we keep the raw data just because, like I said earlier, you'll work with one organization, they want a dashboard, another organization just wants one visual, and another organization just wants the Excel. And you're like, okay, fine, you do whatever you want. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Wow. So that was fantastic. Thank you. I think this would have made my graduate capstone a lot easier, by the way, if I could have used it. I want to open up to questions. I do just have one question. I'm going to use my prerogative. how have you seen this? This is really good for like mapping out kind of like the state of dangerous rhetoric online.
Yeah.
How have you seen that to inform interventions on the ground? How have you seen it play out? Has there been impact?
Yeah.
I'd just love to hear a bit of that. Yeah.
So, so we've just started this work and we've done it in the US where we looked at data.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just for
Yes.
Yes.
So we've done this work in the US where we've looked at polarizing content on religion, and now in Nigeria, and we might be doing it in, I mean, Sudan and in Nigeria. And what's the first thing that once you have the data developed and people are looking at the dashboard, usually the question is, so what now? Because there's a reality that kicks in that, okay, whatever we had, our ideas that there are a million posts that are, I mean, talking about hate speech are, is not true. So what usually ends up happening is trying to think of online campaigns. First of all, who are amplifying this type of content? Who are pushing it back online? Are there actors that we can work with as partners? And how do we recruit them or onboard them? In Nigeria, so currently what they're doing is they want to share this data with what they call community cells and work in the community cells to start showing them basically the realities of this. This is a content that you're all seeing, and how do we, if you were to push it back, how would you do it? As opposed, so basically crowdsourcing solutions that then they would basically push online. But now they have an understanding of what it looks like, as opposed to having one anecdote that is not. Yeah, and also breaking down the hate speech into the core grievances that people have, because now you're able to see people are talking about, this is a common type of topic that is appearing in the different threads of hate speech. So we're going to talk about, let's say, land grievances that are showing up during elections. So it's not really, I hate you because you're this, but there's a land grievance that is being amplified. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Questions in the room? You have, I think it's right there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is really interesting. My question is, have you seen this work being done to inform trust and safety teams at Facebook about, for example, these are the main actors spreading hate speech, these accounts should be shut down?
Yeah.
I know that would also, you'd lose a lot of data that can then inform what's happening, but curious from your experience if that's been a suggestion or something that's been done.
Yes. I'll just talk about briefly about, I know maybe some of you know about the Trusted Partners program where tech companies bring you on board, and we have really a big problem with that system. But it's just because it's very extractive and you never know what happens when they swallow all that data and then they tell you, oh, this was done, and then that's it. And then there's no transparency and comes back. But yes, in terms of connecting whatever we are finding to those teams, yes. And one of the things is also trying to push for more engagement with them that is a bit more structured, as opposed to one-on-one engagement with one organization, saying, okay, you're in Nigeria, these guys are doing this work and they want to engage with you. However, you have other trusted partners who would benefit also from this, not just Facebook, because Facebook will probably just, I don't know, put a stamp on this is misinformation or demote a content, but the partners in the room would be able to address it a bit more effectively, I guess. So there is those links, but with certain companies and not all of them. Yeah. Yeah.
There's been some good thoughts in the chat, and we can go a few minutes over too before we cut to break. Don't worry. Somebody asked, like, differentiating hate speech from dangerous speech. Right?
Yeah.
I think that's a big question. Second, has this platform been able to provide any insights on like which platforms specifically this type of rhetoric is spreading, like which like social media platforms, for example, and how is it taking that into consideration?
Yeah. In terms of differentiating between the two, I think there's a whole literature on dangerous speech that I mean we can dive into that, but
you can give an hour.
Well, yeah. There's I mean, Susan Benish has done amazing work with this, where they have a framework, and or if you look at is it the Rabat? I've forgotten the framework in Rabat, but also has the points that when you're looking at content, whether it's dangerous or not, you think about the speaker, the medium, the audience. So if you meet, I think there are 5 thresholds. I can't remember all of them at once, but if that speech meets all those points, then it's considered dangerous. And that means as a speech that can be dangerous, but is not hateful. Yeah, exactly. So, so for instance, somebody says, let's meet at the Capitol. it can easily be dangerous, right? Because the speaker, the medium, the audience, and yeah. So, but there is a frame, the intention, yeah. So there is a whole framework that is used to differentiate between the two. Sorry, I didn't get your second question was about.
It was about like which.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So with the automatic classifiers for peace, we try not to determine which platforms to look at, and we listen to the peace builder who comes to us and says, we are struggling, we know our contexts, and this is the platform that we use, and we think we want to look at this platform. So in Nigeria, it was Facebook. Now, if we went to another country and they said, we think these three platforms are important, then we'd actually have the three tabs for each platform. And otherwise, I would want to run it in Sudan, I mean, in Nigeria, but then I would just be bringing my own bias into that picture and saying, what about YouTube and what about WhatsApp? And then they'll tell me, well, you can check it, but we wouldn't, yeah, we don't think it's relevant. Yeah.
I think time for one more question in the room, if anybody has one. Yep. I think there's a microphone behind you. Yep.
Thank you. This is very interesting. And actually, at the Carter Center, they do something similar, trying to mine social media for mis and disinformation as opposed to the hate speech you're talking about. But I'm curious here, especially with the question of WhatsApp, is that something, I know we have a lot of trouble because that's not really a platform that you can mine in the same way as these social medias. Is that something that you're finding solutions to, or is that something that you kind of acknowledge as a known hole in the darkness?
Yeah, WhatsApp is protected by privacy, and the moment you start touching on that, then the whole question of ethics come into play. And same not only on WhatsApp, but also on some spaces on public platforms like Facebook. So there are some private Facebook groups that you cannot really touch. And so one of the workarounds, which is not really a workaround, is more to try and understand anecdotally what people are seeing on that space. Because if what we've seen is this idea of cross-platform content moving from one platform to the next. And because then you find somebody wants to amplify it, they'll take it from WhatsApp and then perhaps put it on a Facebook group, right? So asking what people are seeing so that you're also trying to look for it on Facebook, either if it's present or trying to anticipate that it's going to show up. And you're also sort of trying to be prepared that there's this chatter happening on WhatsApp, sooner or later it might show up on our public spaces. What do we do? And if you think about even pre-banking, where people are like, we're heading to an election, this content will probably show up. What do we do before it shows up? What are the guardrails? So that's the way we're trying to have those conversations. And people will tell you, like, we're hearing a lot of conversation about XYZ or this person or this thing that is happening without necessarily naming people, naming names, and just giving a broader blanket about it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so